Hey fam, so this video is going to be on GTFO, the game, but also the tools of GTFO and like some of the ways that you can use them to help make life a little easier in this challenging game. I decided to make this mostly because there's there's a lot to this game, and for newer players there is a bit of a learning curve, and there's a lot of like, oh, I don't know what to do, or how can I do this better. And there's not really a lot of information out there. There is some, but not too much. Some of it's a little outdated due to older rundowns and things that worked before that don't work anymore. And I figured, why not, let's help out the community, and let's see if we can lessen that bit of a learning curve when it comes to this game, because at the end of the day, it is a fun game to play with your friends. So today I'm going to be covering some of the basic tools that you'll end up using, what they do, and some of the best ways to make them work together, as well as like a couple of like tips and tricks. So let's talk about the tools, right? So there's a couple of different tools that you can use in this game. You have your BioTracker, you have your Seafoam launcher, you have your mine deployer, and you have various sentries. And each tool has its own unique purpose and its niche job. Um, so to start off with the basics, I'm just going to go over all of them as a basic, and then I'll show you a couple of like visual examples of how things work out and things that you can do. So the BioTracker is a fantastic tool. Not only does it allow you to mark active enemies, but it also allows you to relay positional information to your team in a game where information is super important. The sentries are a little bit more self-explanatory. You put them down on the floor, and whenever they see an enemy, they're going to shoot at it, whether that enemy is alive, asleep, or not asleep. That's is the better word. So that's pretty much sentries. There's four different kinds. There's a shotgun, a sniper, a burst, and an auto sentry. Um, and each of those is self-explanatory as well. The auto sentry is an automatic rifle. It just shoots full auto. The burst sentry shoots in burst. The shotgun shoots shotgun bullets. And the sniper sentry is a sniper rifle on top of a sentry. And then the mine deployer is exactly what it sounds like. It puts on trip mine. Enemies walk in front of the laser beam and they explode, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. The seafoam launcher is one of the best tools that you can use defensively and offensively throughout the game. It basically allows you to either freeze enemies or kind of like reinforce doors. And as what you're about to see here um, is exactly what it's going to look like. So we're setting up this small test thing here where we show off the combination between the seafoam and the trip mine, and it's one of the best combinations you can do during like in this game with doors whenever things go wrong. You can use this if a whole room wakes up. You can use this during an alarm, so that the mine deals with the majority of the wave. Now every time you do a full charge seafoam blast, it's going to use 20% of your resource. What's recommended is to just put a couple of blobs on a door whenever, like, it's, for example, in the sense of a room that accidentally woke up. You just want to put a couple of blobs on the door. You don't really want to do full charges on that. As a matter of fact, you kind of never really want to do full charges unless you're mid-wave and you know that that door is not going to last very long, and you just need to like reinforce it immediately. So as you can see, we put the trip mine down, the room woke up, and then we just reinforce the door, let the enemies pile onto that door, let them break the door, and as soon as they broke the door, you know, the mine went off and the enemies got taken care of. You save your teammates' health, you save resources this way, you save ammo, which is all very important, because at the end of the day, that's one of the best things about this game, is knowing when to use your tools and when to use your guns. Because tools can be an effective way to save on medkits and ammo for other parts in the game when those tools aren't really as effective. So now let's talk about seafoam tip number 1. So seafoam tip number 1 is that whenever you're foaming a door, you want to foam 9 blobs individually. You want to put them all in the same corner like you see here. Now the reason why you want to do this is for 2 reasons. One, so the game has this weird bug every once in a while where the seafoam will just end up going through the door, and then at which point you're not able to seafoam that door. And number 2, you save 25% of your seafoam every time you do this, because a full charge will use up 12 blobs to give you the same result. So this is a way to save a little bit of seafoam every single time. Now, when you're in an alarm scan and you're using this strategy that you see here, which is called permafoam, you want to just let them beat on the door a little bit and then throw blob and blob and blob and blob, and just little by little just reinforce the door as best as you can until it sounds like they're really hitting that metal and it's no longer thuds. And then at that point you want to do a full charge to reinforce it, and then once the alarm is done, let them come in and you can say hello and then finish off whatever's remaining. This is a very effective way to not only save health but also save ammo, because like I mentioned, there are parts in the game where you can't use your tools. Sometimes there's no doors to seafoam. Sometimes you're on the go and you can't really stop, so you can't really put mines down. Sometimes, you know, you don't have tool ammo because you had some really large alarms that you went through and things went bad and tools got used up. So it's important to identify when you can and can't use these tools and how to do that. And that brings us to seafoam tip number 2. You can use seafoam to kind of gunk up and immobilize very important enemies in the room, like Noodleman, aka Stanley, or you can use it on the big enemies, which are often called giants. And this is pretty useful for whenever you're in a room filled with a lot of enemies and you have to kind of immobilize this one key enemy that could, you know, wake up the entire room and call friends and allow you to essentially go in and kill him and then worry about the rest later and avoid a problematic situation. And seafoam tip number 3, whenever you're dealing with a room that you don't really know, like maybe the room's full of fog and you don't really want to deal with the fog, or maybe you don't, the rooms are extremely dark and there's a lot of enemies in there, like 25 of them or something like that, and you really don't want to deal with all that, you can just pull the room, especially if you know that you do not need this door. So if you don't need a door, again, we're going back into the saving ammo and saving your teammates' health and saving resources. You can essentially just pull the room, close the door, seafoam the door, and let the mines go to work. And it's a very, very effective way of just getting through rooms quickly and efficiently. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with using this strategy. So as I mentioned, this is best used whenever you're dealing with, usually you'll find this in the deeper levels where there's a lot of heavy fog, reduced visibility. Sometimes it's toxic fog, and it's a little bit hard to, maybe you want to save on your fog repellers for a potential alarm. Maybe you just don't want to deal with it. Maybe there's 10 giants down in that fog and you really don't want to deal with it. So there's nothing wrong with pulling the room to into a door that you do not need, um, and just using mines to your advantage to help clear the room, save you the ammo, and save you the tool, save and health, and potentially like saving a whole teammate who could be on the brink of death, because I mean half the time we do operate at 20% health, right? Um, and the other important thing to note when I say this is doors that you do not need. So you can't do this on every door. You have to learn the layout of the maps, and that's only going to come with time and practice. But once you know that you don't need that door, maybe this is the fourth time that you've run this level, and the that on this alarm that you pull that's coming up, they're not even going to go. They're not even going to mess with that door. They're going to spawn a room ahead of that door. Um, those are the doors that you want to use for this type of tactic. And that comes up with learning enemy spawns, which we'll talk about in a different video. But back to the sea foaming. The other thing that I want to say, and that's important and also worth of note, is that you only need to use one mine. You don't really need to use two mines. I know in this video you see multiple mines go on the door, and that's honestly because we don't really care. This is like one of the first levels. It's easy. We got plenty of resources, and we're just doing it to create a little bit of a fireworks display for everybody. But it's important to know and recognize that only one mine ever needs to get put down whenever you see foam a door. You don't need to put two mines. The only exception to that rule is if you know that whatever's behind that door is going to be the bigger enemies that have a lot more chunky amounts of health. Like we're talking the giants, we're talking the big shooters, the hybrids. Those are the ones that for sure, it's okay to put two mines at that point. Because one mine will not kill them, at least without a booster. And that's another thing that we want to talk about is when you have seafoam portion boosters, the seafoam portion does not work with the 9 blob trick. It works with full charges. So if you're ever running seafoam portion boosters, you want to use full charges and not do single blobs, because when you do the full charge, instead of consuming 12, it will consume, like, let's say 5. And it's important to know that and have that in your mind. Now, another also worthwhile mentioning tip is that whenever you're going to see foam a door, it's always good to put the mine kind of low to the floor, usually in the second notch above the door or above the floor. The reason for that is because enemies can crawl underneath the mine, and this has happened before where sometimes you'll put a mine halfway up a door, and then for whatever reason most of the enemies ended up crawling underneath the mine and going past the mine, and you have to deal with them. But I wanted to touch on that as well. So that's other things that you want to keep in mind, right? You want to keep in mind mine positioning, and if you're running any seafoam boosters. If you're running boosters, you want to do full charges, not the 9 blobs. And if you're not, then you want to run the 9 blobs. Now, the other thing that's also worth touching base upon as well is whenever you're going to use your sea foam to sea foam important enemies like giants or noodlemans, you don't have to do a full charge. If you can find yourself in a position where you can just stand above them or safe from them, you can just shoot individual blobs until you hear them do the noise and freeze up, and then you kill them, and then it's not your, and and then at that point, problem solved. Another thing to note is that whenever you do seafoam enemies, the seafoam enemy will not wake up, which means you can seafoam an entire one enemy and then shoot up an entire room, kill everything in that room before that foam wears off. And when that foam wears off, the enemy will not be alert, it will not be awake, and it is not going to call for help. Um, that's something that's very, very important to keep track of because it does help in some situations when you're dealing with multiple scouts or multiple giant enemies or bigs, or hybrids, because you can see foam one, kill the other, let the foam wear off, reset, and then kill the remaining one. And it is a useful technique to help clear up the rooms, especially when you have enemies that are very close to each other. Sometimes you'll open up a door and go into a room and you find that there are 7 enemies all huddled together in a kumbaya circle. And you can always see foam. I think it takes 2 blobs for the small guys. So you can just see foam a couple of them, kill some of them, and then kill the rest. It is something that you can do to help you out, and there's also nothing wrong with using this strategy as well. The next and final tip that I can give to new players is to analyze the room that you're in, especially when it comes to an alarm. So that way you can identify where they're going to come from and what direction they're going to take to go into the room. And the reason why this is important is because sometimes there's these rooms where the way into the room is like up on a second floor or an upper level, and there's a staircase that goes down into the room. And in the room there's an alarm door, and in that, once you pull that alarm door, you know that the enemies are going to come through that doorway that's up there, and they're going to have to take the stairs to come down to you. And you can put seafoam on the floor, which will then, they have to walk through it when they will freeze, and you can then pick them off. And that's perfectly fine and acceptable as well. It's actually a very good strategy to use, because you can put, an entire batch of seafoam on the floor, and I mean the entire thing. So you can use up 100% of your entire tool on that one staircase, especially if it's a very long alarm scan, and it's going to make your teammates' life a lot easier. Now, in this example, you wouldn't be using mines to back up the seafoam. This is where the sentries are going to come in, and you can set up for that, however way you want to do it, depending on how things are set up. But like, you can technically put sentries facing the staircase, you can put sentries, up on top of a shelf pointing at the staircase, or you can just have teammates that are just there shooting them in the event that sentries are not a viable thing, or you don't have ammo or tool ammo. But it is perfectly acceptable, and even if you don't have anything to kill those enemies, it doesn't matter, because if you put enough seafoam on the floor or in that choke point of a staircase, those enemies are not going to get to you for a while. And while the alarm is going on, there's only going to be one wave that spawns. and that wave that spawns has a maximum amount of enemies. So until those enemies die, new enemies aren't going to be spawning in. So it is also a very useful delay tactic as well that you can use to slow them down and buy yourselves time. Then once you're done with that alarm scan, you can then go in, kill the enemies, and continue progressing through the game and through the level. So it's important to understand what you can and can't do. Analyze your rooms carefully, take your time, figure out the best possible plan according to whatever resources you have available at that time, and try to make the most out of it, which is the whole point of why I'm bringing all this information to light for new players. So now let's talk about the mine deployer. So the mine deployer puts down trip mines. These trip mines cast a laser that lets you know what, that if something walks in front of that laser, it's going to kill them. Trip mines do not care if it's one enemy or 20 or if there's a player in the way. None of that matters. The other thing that you need to understand about the way that the trip mines work is that it is a cone damage. So it is a frontal cone from wherever the mine is placed, which means that right up to where you're next to the actual physical mine, it's a very short radius, but as you go down the line of the laser, that radius is going to open up and hit whatever's in that radius. Also, there is a damage fall off, so you don't want to put the mines too far away where they're not as effective. So to make the most out of your mines, you want to understand what enemies you're dealing with, that enemy's height, and the kind of enemy that you're dealing with. And it's important to understand this because it allows you to determine how far up a wall you got to put those mines down, so that way you don't have enemies that run under the mines and come kill your teammates. If you're dealing with giants are very tall. The big shooters are very tall. Hybrids are kind of tallish, but they're a little bit kind of crouched half the time also. So it's a little bit finicky with those guys. So when you're dealing with the big shooters or the giants, you can put them pretty high up. It's not really a problem. If you're dealing with the babies or smalls, you want to keep them low to the ground. If you're dealing with the spiky boys, you can put them like, I would say average human height. Is what let's just call it, like shoulder level. So 5 feet up almost. And to showcase an example of what I'm talking about, I'm going to put some examples up on this wall real quick. And I'll show you why you want to put them low when you're dealing with the small guys. So here's one mine that's like shoulder level. I'm going to put one up that's more for like what would be like a giant. And this one is for smalls, which is pretty low to the ground. So shoulder levels is what you want to use for charters. For giants, you want to use a little bit higher, like head level. And then for the smalls, you want to keep it low to the ground. And then what you're going to notice is that you're going to see that the enemies can run underneath the laser beam. And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. It all depends. But the fact that they can, and these are the ones that are standing up. Sometimes they don't stand up and run at you. Sometimes they just crawl on the ground. And that's when it gets really tricky. And that's why we put them low to the ground. There's also two types of mine positioning. Parallel mines and what you would call perpendicular mines, or to put it in simpler terms, mines pointing at the door. So for the most part, if you have large doors that you can work with, you want to put them parallel, which means on that door frame itself, sideways. But if you can find an object to put it against where it can face the door in a direction, and this is a little bit tricky to do sometimes, it does help as well, especially with the narrow doors. The reason why you do it this way is because when you have a very large door, the enemies are piled up onto the door across the entire door. There's more surface area. Whereas when you have a very small, narrow door, that doesn't happen. So what happens is you get like 2 or 3, because the enemies can block each other almost, right? So you'll have like 2 or 3 against the door, and then the other remaining 10 or 12 are going to be behind those. So if you put a parallel mine on a small door, it's going to kill some, but not all. But if you put a mine that faces the small door, you'll probably kill the entire wave. And for what it's worth, don't ever do what you're seeing here. Don't put like 100 mines on a door. This is entirely overkill, but it is definitely fun to watch. And, you know, if it's something that you want to do for funsies, more power to you, man. Don't let anybody tell you how to have fun. But look at those fireworks. It was so much overkill, but it was totally fun to do that. So the mine deployer is very straightforward. There's not really too much to go with it. As I mentioned earlier, it's most effective when partnered with something like seafoam or doors. It allows you to kill as many enemies as possible, but you can also use it to kill certain types of enemies as well. You can, for like if you're ever dealing with what they call the tanks or the hydras, um, you can essentially put mines on a wall and then see if you can bait him to walk in front of those mines, but with his back towards the mines. That way, when the mines go off, it puts some damage into the. But these are more like boss enemies, and this is a very specific case scenario and not your common plays. Also, if you're dealing with big chargers or waves of big chargers, you can kind of use it to help you out that way as well. I don't really 100% recommend it if you're ever dealing in a level where you don't have a way to get the enemies to bunch up. Because like I said, if you put a mine down, the mine doesn't care if there's 1 enemy or 5 or 6. It will just blow up. And if you're dealing with something like, for example, an ongoing enemy wave, you'll end up with like 1 enemy will run through usually, and it will kill 1 or 2 enemies, and then the rest of the enemies will start coming towards you as well at that point. And you know, you use a mine and it didn't really do much at that point. So you have to know when you can maximize the mines to make the most out of it. Which is why the most common uses are doors and seafoam doors and specific enemy kills. So when I say specific enemy kills, I'm talking about like those niche case scenarios, like when you use them against the tanks, or if you're using them against the noodle mans. You can kill 1 noodle man with 1 mine. It will wake up the entire room if you do this. But at the very least, you don't have to worry about the noodle man if you don't have a member that's too confident in being able to kill it. If you're dealing with the spiky noodle mans or charger scouts, those have a little bit more health, and you have to use 2 mines to kill those. Which is still easier than doing a synchronized attack, but it's at that point the better tool to use is the sea foam, because you can just sea foam him and then just hammer away until he dies with a friend, and it's a little bit easier to. It's a safer way of doing charger scouts, and it's less of a resource usage at that point. Um, which, you know, resources are important about this game. Like having you're kind of, it's a resource management game as much as it is a shooter action horror, and trying to make the most out of those resources that's given to you, the toolkits and the ammos and all that stuff, is one of the key things or key ways of succeeding. But one mine will kill one regular noodle boy. Two mines will kill a charger scout. If you have seafoam, use seafoam for the charger scout. If you don't have seafoam, what you want to do is you want to put two mines very, very, very much in line with each other, vertically. So you don't want to put them side by side, because one will go off but not the other one, or one will go off and hit them, but the other one is a little bit too far forward and it won't hit them. So you have to put them vertically, one on top of the other, and you have to make sure that they're very lined up for the charger scouts. So that way when he walks in front of them, they both go off at the exact same time, and it's enough damage to kill him. So the other thing that's important to keep note is mines do have friendly fire. So if you're using a very small room, try to be as far away as possible from that mine. Even if you're not in a small room, don't be anywhere near that mine when it goes off. It will kill you and your teammates. There is friendly fire in this game. And you know, now don't ever try to put a mine down in the middle of like a nonstop like surge wave. Or error alarms when you have nonstop enemies coming at you. Chances are by the time you put that mine down and you get away from wherever you put it down, there's an enemy already there, and it will kill you. Another common thing that you'll find is that there's sometimes whenever you're dealing with other situations where you're on the go, you have this error alarm, enemies are spawning at you, but you have to put a mine down to kill whatever's on the other side of a door, like a blood door. Every once in a while, what will end up happening is that as you're fighting the enemies that are in the room with you, they move around a lot, and for whatever reason, they love running up to doorways that they have no business running up to, and they're not even going to attack that door, and they'll set off that mine anyways. So you kind of have to be a little bit yeah, you kind of have to like think ahead a little bit, like be a little bit proactive when it comes to mine mine placement. So now let's talk about the sentries. So I mentioned earlier there's four types of sentries. You have sniper sentries, you have shotgun sentry, you have auto sentry, and you have the burst sentry. And the way I like to describe the sentries is this way. So your standard sentry is going to be the burst sentry. The burst sentry is the one who has a balanced amount of damage to ammo conservation. So it doesn't kill anything particularly fast, but it doesn't burn through ammo like there's no tomorrow. The sniper sentry is a good example of one thing that burns through ammo very, very fast, but it kills almost everything it shoots, with the exception of big enemies where it takes an extra bullet to kill them or two. Then you have the shotgun sentry. Has a little bit better ammo conservation than the shotgun sentry, but it doesn't have very good range. So those are usually more effective if you put them in front of a doorway. And I mean directly in front of a doorway, like 5 feet away from a door, where it can just go ham and get the most out of that bullet spread. Then you have the auto sentry. Now the auto sentry is a complete opposite of the sniper sentry. It has an insane amount of ammo on it. You like auto sentries have like 500 rounds maximum, but it doesn't kill anything. It takes an extremely high amount of ammo to kill anything. So the best way to use the auto sentry um, is by using it as a way to stagger enemies and keep them at bay to allow the other sentries to put in that work. Another thing that I'm going to touch on is what's called BioTracker symbiosis, which is something new that developers added to the game recently. So whenever you're running with a BioTracker, certain sentries will be able to track and lock onto enemies faster to shoot faster. There is a cooldown between locking onto enemies and activating. So it'll take like maybe like a second or two to lock onto the enemy, shoot at it, kill it, and then it'll take like another 1 or 2 seconds before it gets the next enemy and locks onto it and kills that one. And having somebody with a BioTracker in your hands helps a lot with that. Currently, the sentries that benefit from BioTracker symbiosis is the sniper sentry a little bit, and the shotgun sentry gets the most of gets a lot of it. So ideally, you have to kind of figure out what level you're going into and which sentries to take for that level. Usually, like if you're doing reactor levels, you want to take at least one sniper sentry with you because you'll have a lot of bigs that come in. You'll want to have a BioTracker with you, and then maybe 2 burst sentries or an auto and a burst. The auto sentry should help you keep the waves at bay. It really depends on what you want to do at that point with your team, because usually everybody's fire is shooting during that time. This is a really good example of how the auto sentry works that I'm showing here. And the way that the auto sentry works is literally just by staggering enemies. It takes forever to kill anything. That's not its job. Its job is to simply create like a makeshift wall so that the enemies can't get to you. And it works really, really effectively, believe it or not. But as you can tell, all those bullets are shot and nothing died. Essentially the burst sentries are usually the go-to, and they work really, really, really good for pretty much almost any scenario. They have good range, they have good damage, and they work pretty much in almost every scenario. There's a couple of sentry combinations you can use that work really well as well. Having an auto sentry does have its uses though. Another thing to keep note is to understand how best to use your sentries. So if you have an auto sentry and like a burst, and let's say you have seafoam and a BioTracker, so you don't have any mines, you don't really want to put down a door. Like, you don't want the enemies to pile on top of a door, because they're gonna overrun your sentries real quick. It's always better to have the door open and let them trickle into the room, and then let the sentries put in work. I'm gonna show you an example of exactly what happens whenever you decide to like seal a door and then have like the sentries there, and then you have to deal with like a whole wave of enemies. It's not entirely ineffective, but it is also not optimal. And this is in like if you have like an easy alarm or something, or you're into one of the easier levels, it's not that big of a deal. But when you're into later levels of the game and you're dealing with the heavier enemies, it's also not, um, especially if there's a lot of bigs with that alarm. It's not 100% effective, um, and it can lead your team into some problems. But it's perfectly okay to do this if you have mines and seafoam and sentries, because the mines will kill most of the enemies, and then the sentries will clean up whatever remains for you. That way, you don't have to shoot any of the enemies, and you can save ammo. Um, but when you're dealing with like an entire wave against a door like this, usually it becomes a giant shoot fest. The auto sentry will do its best to keep most of the enemies at bay, um, while the burst sentry tries to kill most of the enemies for you. Um, it's also incredibly fun to listen to that auto sentry go off. For whatever reason, it's one of the most satisfying sounds you can hear. The only one that comes close to it, or the other ones that come close to it, is really the shotgun sentry and the sniper sentry. Just hearing those go off is just, very satisfying as well. Um, but it does work. And I'm a high advocate for the auto sentry. I think it's a very underrated sentry in this game. I wish more and more people would take advantage of it the way they're supposed to and use it the way it's supposed to be used. Um, I'm very thankful to the other members of the community that have taught me a lot of what I am now, sharing in this video, because, like I said, there's so much information in this game and it's not really out there too much. Um, but it is such a fun game to play with your friends, and it is an entirely fun game to just have fun in, kill enemies, and find new ways to use tools, and really, really help you bring down that difficulty level of the game. So, I highly recommend, for the most part, if possible, and if you can do it, have one auto sentry with you, and then you can have a burst, seafoam, and mines. Sometimes, if you have enough, if you have, you also have to take into account the boosters. Okay, so here's an example. So if you have boosters with you that, help provide like supply efficiency, where you can make a lot of use out of each tool pack that's given to you, and it, instead of giving you the 20% to your sentry, it gives you like 30, um, or more, then you can run multiple sentries on a level like that, and you don't have to worry about ammo. And a really, really strong combination is 3 burst sentries and 1 auto sentry. Essentially, with 1 auto sentry and 3 burst sentries, there's not a lot coming through that doorway. It doesn't matter if the door's open. It doesn't matter if it's a level 4 alarm, 5 alarm, or 6 alarm. As long as those sentries have ammo, there's not a lot of enemies that are going to get past that amount of firepower. And it's a very, very good way, good technique to use overall. Another good technique to use is if you have an auto sentry and a shotgun sentry. They make a very good combination, because the auto sentry doesn't let them get through the doorway, and the shotgun sentry is going to make short work of everybody that's there. Main problem with shotgun sentry is that it doesn't have a lot of ammo to begin with, so it's not, um, useful for longer scans, but it is incredibly useful on something like a blood door. The blood doors are the doors that, have like this rust covering on it, and you hear a lot of banging noises, from the other side. Shotgun sentries work amazing with blood doors. Um, so if you're going into a level that has a lot of those, take a BioTracker with you, take an auto sentry, take a shotgun sentry, and take a mine deployer. Um, the mine deployer will kill a lot of what's behind the door, and whatever remains is going to get killed by those 2 sentries. Another thing to point out with sentries is that they do not work with shadow enemies unless you have a BioTracker to ping them. Shadow enemies cannot be targeted by the sentries on their own. You need the BioTracker to ping the enemies before they get to the line of fire of the sentries. That way the sentries can know that they're there and shoot at the shadows. That is a very, very important thing to keep in mind. But the fun thing about that is that you can put a sentry down when you're dealing with shadows. And as the green laser beam sweeps back and forth, you can kind of see where they are. So, and the sentries aren't going to shoot the room because they can't shoot at the shadows who are asleep because they can't detect them. So it's a fun little trick that you can do that not a lot of people think about. But it is definitely really, really cool. And let me see. The next thing I can say about sentries is that they can shoot vertically as well. So if you put a sentry up on like a box, it will shoot down onto whatever's below it. Maybe not directly below it, but if it's in front of it, you know, kind of like up on a second floor, and the enemies go down a staircase that's like, let's say 20 feet away in front of that sentry, it will shoot the enemies at the bottom of the staircase. You can put the sentries on the top of a staircase and it will shoot down the stairs as well. So you do have very flexible placement when it comes to sentries. And you can get very creative with it as well. You can also place it, I would say, you can place them up on a, like if you know that the enemies are going to come from like a second floor. Like, it depends on the layout. You got to really analyze the layout of the room. Try to make the most out of it. Look for the choke points. Try to optimize your like your placement. Try to figure out where the enemies are coming from and what path they're going to take to get to you. You want to keep this in mind mostly as well because there is friendly fire in the game, so you don't want to put the sentry in the location where it's like super far away from a door, and you're gonna have scans that are gonna go towards, you know, in front of the sentry, and then you have to like try to stand in the scan with the sentry behind you. And then it can kill your teammates very quickly, especially the sniper, the shotgun sentry. They'll drop a teammate faster than you can pick that thing up. So if you ever need to, always pick up your sentry, redeploy it. And it, like, sentry placement when it comes to scans and alarms is really about understanding your room and understanding where the enemies are coming from and what path they're going to take. And with that being said, it is perfectly acceptable to put the sentries outside of the room, shooting into the room, and not always have to put them in the room, shooting at whatever door their enemies are going to come from. So there's nothing wrong with doing outside placements. It really depends on what you're dealing with and what type of alarm it is and the layout. But it is a very, very, very viable strategy, especially if you only have one sentry in your group. So there's a lot of factors that come into play with when it comes to optimal sentry placement. So if you only have like one burst sentry and everybody else has something completely different, like a bio, seafoam, and a trip mine, then that burst sentry doesn't have to be in the room. You can put that outside of the room, and you can put that, shooting into the room, somewhere that's far away from your teammates. Um, it really just depends on those type of factors. But it is, I do want you to know that you can put it outside of the room and there's nothing wrong with it. So to summarize everything, sniper sentries don't carry a lot of ammo, but they'll kill small enemies in one shot. They don't shoot very fast, even with the BioTracker symbiosis. Burst sentries don't get advantage of BioTracker symbiosis. Shotgun sentries do, but they don't have long range. Also doesn't have a terribly huge amount of ammo either, but are very, very good at close range to enemies. Um, and that brings me to booster combinations that you can use. So whenever you have boosters that say, for example, short range sentry damage, that's really, really good on a shotgun sentry more than any other sentry. Sentry damage boosters, overall booster damage, are pretty much good on any sentry. But don't use it on the auto sentry. It's kind of a waste. Because it doesn't do a lot of damage to begin with, and you'll get better use out of that booster if you put it on something like a burst sentry, for example, or a shotgun sentry. Um, Another thing that you can do that makes really, really good work of things is sentry CPU speed increases. Um, there's a video that I have. If you ever want to see a good example of what Sentry CPU speed looks like with BioTracker Symbiosis, I have a video where I put a crazy amount of Sentry CPU speed, like 80% or something like that, on a Sniper Sentry. And it was shooting so fast that it would shoot like twice at the same enemy before that enemy died. It was basically a sniper sentry that shot like an auto sentry. It's a very, very fun video. I'll put the link in the description if anybody wants to check it out. It was one of the best, most fun moments I had playing this game. Um, but Sentry CPU speed increases. What it does is that it speeds up the tracking ability and the fire rate of the Sentry. So that works really, really good with the slower sentries like the Sniper Sentry. Um, it also kind of works really good with the Shotgun Sentry as well. Um, I would say if it's a high amount of Sentry CPU speed increase, try to use that more on burst sentries and sniper sentries. And if it's like a small amount, I would say shotgun sentry and burst sentry. Because the shotgun sentry isn't particularly slow, and neither is the burst sentry. Whereas the sniper sentry is very slow. So if it's something like 10%, you're not going to see a big difference on a sniper sentry, but you will see a bit of a difference on the other ones, like the burst and shotgun. So understanding what boosters you have and what you can do with them is also a really, really good thing to know. and um and then figuring and then understanding the level and teammates and sentry combinations helps really, really well. I mentioned earlier, if you have something like 3 burst sentries and 1 auto sentry, that not much is going to get through that doorway. And I'm kind of setting that up right now. It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and it's amazingly fun to watch. Um, but it is also a really, really awesome tactic that you can do. Now, if you're gonna do this tactic, I do want to say you want to put your sentries in the room so that way nothing can get in the room. You don't want to put them outside the room, because whatever runs really, really fast will just end up inside the room and try to kill you. So whenever you're using multiple sentries, usually you put those in the room. Whenever you have just 1 or 2, it's okay to put them outside sometimes. It really just depends. Um, but you want to put your auto sentry centralized to, for example, where like kind of central to the doorway itself, something where it can kind of cover the entire door. You don't want to put it off in a corner or something like that where it has a very obscure line of fire. Um, so you want to put it facing the door as best as possible, but not too close to the door. Um, the burst sentries, you kind of want to place those a little bit more obscure linear line of fires. So the way it works is the auto sentry will stagger them from coming into the room or slow them down. And then as they go into the room, the burst sentries will take care of the ones that get into the room, because they're not the ones shooting at the door. They're shooting at whatever's getting past the door. So as one or two enemies trickle into the room, you'll have 2 or 3 burst sentries that lock in and fire away at that 1 or 2 that trickles into that room. And that is one of the best things that you can ever do. And again, I will say that you can also only do this if you have like stuff like supply efficiency, where you know for a fact that you have the ammo, or you're going to be able to keep the sentries topped off to be able to use this strategy. Most levels where you only get like 1 or 2 uses of tool, you're not going to be able to do this and keep all sentries with sufficient amount of ammo. So this is really more one of those niche case type things, depending on the boosters that you have and the booster that your team uses. And if you do this, do not close the door. Because if you close the door, when they break through that door, there are so many enemies, the sentries cannot keep up with this. You do not want to close the door. You want to leave the door open, let them come in. It's an open invitation to a fantastic 4th of July party. And it's also incredibly fun to listen to and watch from the sidelines. And as always, if you ever want to help out your sentries, you feel free to shoot them and feel free to shoot with them. There's nothing wrong with this, but it is an incredibly fun thing to watch. But as you can see, the auto sentry is doing its job. It's kind of like staggering them as they funnel into the door. There's one burst sentry here that's shooting through the doorway as they come into the door, and then there's 2 burst sentries that basically kills whatever gets into the room. And this it's incredibly effective because nothing is coming into the room. But this is also a really good example of when you have the danger circles that are inside sentry line of fire. So, always try to time your placement. So that way, you step into the circle in between the waves or in between the spawn rates or whatever. That way you're not like standing in the circle and then you have 3 sentries go off behind you and drop you faster than you can figure out what the hell just happened. So now let's talk about the BioTracker. And this is the last tool, and it's actually one of the best tools that you can work with in the game. It provides a lot of information. It tells you if there's enemies in the next room. It doesn't matter if there's fog, it doesn't matter if there's darkness, and it doesn't matter if the enemies are asleep or not. If the enemies, it doesn't even matter if the enemies are shadows or not. It is a great information positioning tool because it allows you to relay information to your teammates that is important. And if the enemies are asleep, it'll show up as white dots. If the enemies are awake, it will show up as red dots. You can only ping enemies that are awake, so you cannot ping enemies if they're asleep. Another common thing that you will notice sometimes is that instead of getting white dots or the big red dots, you'll get like these really small, tiny red dots. That's a known bug in the game. The tiny red dots are the same as white dots. So don't be alarmed if you ever see that. And if you're ever coming up on a room and you see a bunch of white dots with a red dot walking around or moving, that's usually Noodle Man. So those are scouts, and it is a good way to let your team know that there's a scout in the next room as well. Um, it's also the job of the BioTracker to be on point with using the BioTracker. So if you're dealing with shadow waves, you have to just kind of permanently be nonstop pinging with the BioTracker. You don't want to ping as soon as the enemy hits the BioTracker. You want to wait till they're about 10-meter mark in the BioTracker. That way, whenever you do ping, it will ping like 90% of the enemy wave and not just two enemies, because there is a about 8-9 second cooldown in between usage of the BioTracker, and you want to take that into account. There is a booster that does help. It's called Tracker CPU Speed Increase, and that helps you ping more frequent and faster. Um, but just wanted to let you guys know. Also, when relaying information, kind of give directions with it. So you want to say something like, if you want to use the compass markers at the top of the screens, you can say, hey, there's 4 enemies in the 120 direction, 20 meters away, um, or there's 4 enemies north, 20 meters away. You want to kind of be a little bit like, you want to provide that level of orientation, especially if you're dealing with like low visibility environments like darkness and fog. That's another thing to keep in mind, and it really does help the team a lot. Letting people know that if there's scouts in the next room, pinging the scouts, because you can ping the scouts from like a room away, so that way if you're in the scout room, you know where that scout is, and it doesn't matter if the room is dark or not. There's a red triangle that will let you know where these enemies are. These are all very, very, very useful tips and tricks, and information to keep in mind when you have a BioTracker and having somebody on the bio. If you're ever playing with a bot, give the BioTracker to the bot. Bots have like, I think it's built into them, but they have like double range with the BioTracker than you would. So they can ping from like 50 meters away or 100 meters away, and they can do it a lot more often than you can. So having a bot with a BioTracker is a very, very useful thing to do, and that is something that's usually not really out there or spoken of. But it is something that a veteran player can tell you and will tell you a lot of the times. So yeah, if you're going to be playing with the bots, give the BioTracker to the bot. They'll do a lot better job with it than you will, and it will free you up to do what you need to do and keep your team alive. Because the bots are not the best at shooting. So just food for thought. And hopefully you liked the video. If you do, consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel. I am going to be making more videos. I try to be as comprehensive as possible. I know it's a lot of information, but it is a lot of useful information, and it can mean the difference between beating a level and rage quitting a game and uninstalling it. So the game is a good game, and it does deserve a fair shot. And in an effort to help give both the game and players a fair shot at enjoying this game, it is the reason why I'm doing this. I will be making other videos, hopefully not as long, um, going over melee weapons and tips and tricks and the other things in the game. So keep an eye out for those. And if there's any other videos that you guys do want to see, drop a comment in, drop a comment below. Um, and also, if there's any other comments that you want to drop, you can drop that as well. Let me know how you like this one. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if this helped you or you and your friends complete any particular level. Um, like feedback is important. So I do, I do read all the comments as best as I can. I may not always respond to every comment, but I will definitely read through the comments for sure. Thank you guys for watching. And if you want to see more GTFO content, check out my other videos and check out the videos that are coming in. Subscribe so you can get the notifications whenever a new video does show up. You can also check me out on Twitch or Kick. I have my links in the bio. Feel free to follow, catch some GTFO action and other games that I may be working on at the time. And if you do end up in the streams, let me know if you came from this video and from this YouTube channel. I'm always curious to find out how people find out about me. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys next one. Bye for now.